I always figured if my Lamborghini Huracan Evo was going to meet an untimely end, it would be with me behind the wheel, perhaps on a closed track, pushing it just a little too far. What I didn't expect was for it to be T-boned into a pretzel by a pimply teenager trying to impress his equally clueless friends, a teenager who happened to be the son of our HOA president from hell, Karen. And the cherry on top of this automotive sundae of disaster? Karen, in all her puffed-up self-righteous glory, demanding I pay for the damages? Because, and I quote, "It's your car, dear, ultimately your responsibility." I'm still trying to figure out the mental gymnastics required to arrive at that conclusion. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe how this whole insane saga unfolded. Stick around, because this story gets wilder than a toddler in a candy store with a stolen credit card. It all started innocently enough, if anything involving an HOA can ever be truly innocent. I'd moved into the prestigious Oakwood Estates about a year prior, drawn by the quiet streets and the relatively large garages, a must for someone with a passion for cars like myself. I'm a retired software architect, and after decades of debugging code, I found a certain zen in the mechanical perfection of high-performance automobiles. My Verde Mantis Lamborghini Huracan Evo was my pride and joy, a reward for a career spent wrestling logic gates and unruly algorithms. It wasn't just a car, it was a sculpture, a symphony of engineering, and admittedly, a bit of a head-turner. This, as I would soon learn, was a problem for some. Specifically for Karen. Karen, whose real name was probably something innocuous like Susan, but Karen just fit her like a custom-tailored, slightly too tight blazer. She was the self-appointed queen of Oakwood Estates, ruling with an iron fist and a clipboard full of violation notices. Her chariot of choice was a pristine white Range Rover, the kind that screams, "I have strong opinions about your lawn." She herself usually sported expensive-looking athleisure wear that seemed to have never seen the inside of a gym, her face perpetually locked in an expression of mild disapproval, as if the world constantly failed to meet her exacting standards. My first run-in with Karen had been minor, almost comical. A notice about my trash cans being visible from the street for an hour longer than the bylaws permitted. I just shrugged, brought them in, and figured that was the price of admission for a neighborhood with manicured lawns. Little did I know, this was merely the overture to a full-blown opera of absurdity. The Lamborghini, however, seemed to be a particular thorn in her side. I didn't flaunt it. I kept it garaged, drove it respectfully, and mostly took it out for weekend cruises or dedicated car events. But its mere presence, the vibrant green glinting in my meticulously clean garage when the door was open, seemed to offend her sensibilities. I'd catch her giving it lingering, disapproving stares during her neighborhood patrols. Once, she'd cornered me while I was polishing it, ostensibly to discuss the approved shade of beige for mailbox posts, but her eyes kept flicking to the Huracan. "Quite a conspicuous vehicle for a quiet neighborhood, isn't it, Mr. Henderson?" she'd remarked, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that set my teeth on edge. I'd simply smiled and said, "It brings me joy, Karen, and it's surprisingly quiet when I stick to the speed limit." Her lips thinned. From then on, I was clearly on her radar. The night it happened, I was out of town for a small tech conference I still attended out of habit. I'd left my house secured, alarms on, the usual precautions. The Huracan was snug in its dedicated bay in my 3-car garage, covered and on a trickle charger. My neighbor, a kindly older gentleman named Arthur, had a spare key to my house for emergencies, but certainly not for my cars. The first sign of trouble was a call from Arthur at an ungodly hour, around 2 a.m. His voice was shaky. Mark, you need to come home. There's been an incident with your green car." My blood ran cold. "What kind of incident, Arthur?" I asked, already throwing clothes into my suitcase. "A bad one," he said grimly. "The police are here. It's wrecked, Mark. Really wrecked." "Wrecked? How?" "It was locked in a secure garage." I pressed him for details, but he was flustered. All he could tell me was that it was a few blocks away, wrapped around a telephone pole, and that a young man was involved. A young man I'd soon learn was Karen's darling son, Kevin. Kevin, a lanky 17-year-old with a perpetually smug look inherited from his mother and a penchant for trouble that was legendary among the neighborhood kids. He was the kind of kid whose parents always insisted was just misunderstood while he was busy keying cars or shoplifting from the local convenience store. I made the 2-hour drive back home in a state of controlled fury and disbelief. The conference was forgotten. All I could think about was my beautiful car, a masterpiece of Italian engineering reduced to scrap metal. When I finally arrived, the scene was even worse than Arthur had described. The Verde Mantis green was barely recognizable under the mangled steel and deployed airbags. It looked like it had been in a fight with a transformer and lost badly. The front end was obliterated, one wheel was completely detached, and the sleek lines were now a jagged mess. Police lights still strobed, casting an eerie glow on the devastation. An officer, a weary-looking Sergeant Miller, filled me in. Kevin, it seemed, had decided my Lamborghini would be the perfect vehicle to impress his friends. He'd somehow gained access to my garage, found the valet key I kept in a supposedly secure lockbox, a detail that still makes me sick to my stomach. I suspect he'd seen me access it once, or it was an inside job of sorts, perhaps observing habits, and taken the Huracan on a joyride. A very short, very destructive joyride. Witnesses reported him driving like a maniac, fishtailing, speeding excessively through residential streets before losing control and plowing into the pole at high speed. Miraculously, Kevin and his 2 passengers had escaped with relatively minor injuries, mostly cuts and bruises, thanks to Lamborghini's incredible safety features. The car, however, was unequivocally totaled. My stomach churned. The sheer audacity, the blatant violation, the utter disrespect, it was overwhelming. Sergeant Miller assured me Kevin was already in custody, facing a slew of charges: grand theft auto, reckless driving, driving without a license, endangerment, small comfort, but it was something. As the tow truck prepared to haul away the carcass of my dream car, I just stood there, watching, a cold knot of anger tightening in my chest. This wasn't just about a car. It was about a fundamental breach of trust, of security, of decency. And I had a sinking feeling that dealing with Kevin was only going to be the beginning. His mother was yet to make her appearance, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that Karen wouldn't disappoint in the drama department. The dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful, indifferent backdrop to the ugly reality on the ground. This was far from over. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a grim determination. The police had been professional, taking statements, documenting the scene meticulously. They confirmed Kevin had been bragging to his friends for weeks about how he was going to borrow the rich guy's supercar. The arrogance was astounding. Apparently, he'd managed to snag the spare garage door opener from my unlocked daily driver, which I'd foolishly left in the driveway one afternoon while washing it. Something Karen must have noted during her patrols. From there, he'd found the valet key lockbox inside the garage. It was a stupid mistake on my part, leaving that opener accessible, a lesson learned in the most brutal way possible. The car itself was insured, of course, comprehensively. I'd already made the initial call to my insurance company, a somber conversation detailing the demise of a vehicle they knew was more than just transport to me. They were sympathetic, promising to start the process immediately. But the thought of navigating that bureaucratic maze while dealing with the emotional fallout was daunting. My immediate concern, however, was the legal circus that was undoubtedly about to begin. Sergeant Miller had mentioned Kevin was already trying to spin a tale about how I'd left the keys out for him, and that it was all a misunderstanding. The sheer nerve of the kid was breathtaking, though entirely predictable given his parentage. Later that morning, after a few hours of fitful, angry sleep, the doorbell rang. I knew before I even opened it who it would be, and there she stood, Karen, in all her glory. She wasn't wearing her usual power athleisure. Today, it was a stiff, expensive-looking silk blouse, slightly wrinkled, as if she'd thrown it on in a hurry, paired with tailored slacks that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Her Range Rover was parked at the curb, angled slightly onto my driveway as if staking a claim. Her face, normally a mask of cool disdain, was flushed, her eyes narrowed. She looked like a cornered badger, ready to lash out. Behind her, looking pale and considerably less smug than usual, was her husband, a perpetually browbeaten man named Gary, who always seemed to be apologizing for Karen's existence with his eyes. "Mr. Henderson," Karen began, her voice tight and devoid of any pretense of neighborly warmth. "We need to talk about this unfortunate incident." I leaned against the door jamb, arms crossed, my expression carefully neutral. "Unfortunate incident?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "Karen, your son stole my car, a car worth over $250,000, and totaled it. Unfortunate incident. Doesn't quite capture the gravity of the situation, does it?" Gary winced. Karen, however, seemed to inflate. "Now, let's not exaggerate," she snapped, waving a dismissive hand adorned with several large, gaudy rings. "Kevin simply made a youthful mistake. He was showing off, as boys do. He certainly didn't steal it. He was just borrowing it." I felt a slow burn ignite within me. "Borrowing it?" I echoed, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to remain composed. "Karen, he broke into my garage. He took the car without permission, he drove it recklessly and destroyed it. That's grand theft auto, a felony. The police seem to agree." Karen's eyes flashed. "The police are overreacting. He's just a boy, a good boy from a good family," she insisted, her voice escalating. "And frankly, Mr. Blanks Henderson, if you're going to own such an ostentatious vehicle, you should expect this sort of thing. It's an attractive nuisance." An attractive nuisance. My Lamborghini. I almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated gall was something to behold. This was beyond entitlement. This was a journey into an alternate reality where consequences were for other people. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for your son's criminal actions?" I asked, my disbelief evident. "I'm saying," Karen said, leaning forward conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a tone that was meant to be reasonable but just sounded patronizing, "that this has caused my family a great deal of distress. Kevin is traumatized, and there's the matter of the damage to your vehicle." I waited, a sense of dread mixed with morbid curiosity about where this was going. "Well," she continued, puffing herself up, "since it's your car and your insurance, it's obviously your responsibility to cover the damages. In fact," she added, as if this was a perfectly logical conclusion, "we expect you to handle it discreetly. We don't want Kevin's future jeopardized by this youthful indiscretion. Perhaps you could even tell the police it was all a misunderstanding, that you let him borrow it." I stared at her. Just stared. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Gary shuffled his feet, looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Finally, I found my voice, and it was cold as ice. "Let me get this straight, Karen. Your son steals my Lamborghini, crashes it into oblivion, and you want me to pay for the damages and lie to the police to protect him?" Karen nodded curtly, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips, as if she'd just proposed a perfectly reasonable business transaction. "Precisely. It's the sensible thing to do. For everyone involved, think of it as a community contribution, keeping things harmonious." I actually did laugh then, a short, sharp, humorless sound. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "you are delusional, absolutely, certifiably delusional. Not only will I not be paying for a single cent of the damage your delinquent son caused, but I will be pressing charges to the fullest extent of the law, and as for your request that I lie to the police, that's called obstruction of justice, and I believe it's also a felony. You might want to consult a lawyer before you continue down this path." Her face, which had been smug, contorted with rage. "How dare you? We are pillars of this community. My Kevin is a good boy. You, with your flashy car and your aloof attitude, you're the problem here," she shrieked, spittle flying. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer? You'll regret this, Mr. Henderson. We'll sue you for emotional distress, for endangering a minor with your automotive hazard." Gary finally found his voice, a timid squeak. "Now, Karen dear, perhaps we should just—" "Quiet, Gary," she snapped, without even looking at him. She turned back to me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over, Henderson, not by a long shot. You'll see. People like you always get what's coming to them." And with that, she spun on her heel, practically shoving Gary aside, and stormed back to her Range Rover, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. I watched them drive away, the absurdity of the encounter leaving me momentarily stunned. Then, a cold resolve settled in. This wasn't just about a wrecked car anymore. This was about principle. This was about accountability. Karen had just declared war, and I, A man who had built a career on logic and precision was more than prepared to meet her on that battlefield. My first call after my insurance company was going to be to the best litigation lawyer I knew. This suburban warfare was about to get serious. My mind raced. Karen's demand wasn't just audacious, it was a declaration of hostilities. She genuinely believed she could bully and bluster her way out of her son facing consequences, and even more astonishingly, shift the financial burden onto me. The attractive nuisance argument was particularly galling. My Lamborghini, safely secured in my locked garage, was somehow responsible for her son's premeditated act of theft and destruction. The logic was so warped it was almost an art form. But anger, while satisfying, wasn't a strategy. I needed to be methodical, precise, just like debugging a complex piece of software. My first priority was to ensure my own legal and financial protection. I immediately contacted my insurance provider again, appraised them of Karen's visit and her unique perspective on liability. My claims adjuster, a surprisingly understanding woman named Sarah, listened patiently. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice calm and professional, "please don't worry about Mrs. Praisingly-Sove. Whatever her name is, her claims are baseless. Your policy covers theft and vandalism. We will pursue Kevin and his parents for full restitution, including your deductible, through subrogation. Her demanding you pay is frankly laughable from a legal standpoint." That was reassuring. Sarah advised me to document everything, every interaction, every piece of correspondence. "People like that," she added with a hint of weariness, "can make things messy, even when they're clearly in the wrong." Sage advice. My next call was to Eleanor Vance, a bulldog of a litigator I'd known for years. Ellie had a reputation for being incredibly sharp, utterly ruthless in court, and having zero tolerance for nonsense. She was exactly who I needed. I explained the situation, from the theft to Karen's jaw-dropping demands. Ellie was silent for a moment after I finished, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant legal mind. Then she chuckled, a dry, dangerous chuckle. "Mark," she said, "this woman sounds like a caricature. Attractive nuisance for a car in a locked garage? Demanding you pay for damage her son caused to your stolen property? This is gold. Pure, unadulterated, legally suicidal gold." Her amusement was infectious, and I felt a sliver of my tension ease. "So, what's our play, Ellie?" I asked. "We play it smart," she replied. "First, full cooperation with the police investigation into Kevin. We want him prosecuted to the fullest extent. Grand theft auto is serious. Second, we let your insurance handle the primary claim for the car. They have the resources. We monitor that closely. Third, and this is where it gets interesting, we prepare for Karen's inevitable offensive. She threatened to sue you for emotional distress and endangering a minor? Let her try. We'll bury her in counterclaims for harassment, defamation if she starts mouthing off publicly, and potentially even intentional infliction of emotional distress on you." Ellie also advised me to beef up my home security. If the son was bold enough to steal a Lamborghini and the mother is this unhinged, who knows what they might try next? Get cameras covering every angle of your property. Document everything. I'd already been thinking along those lines. The old security system was decent, but it was time for an upgrade. Within days, I had a state-of-the-art system installed, with high-resolution cameras covering the driveway, the garage entrance, the street, even the back of the house. Every approach was monitored and recorded. I also started keeping a detailed log of any interactions, however minor, with Karen or any other HOA board members. Arthur, my neighbor, proved to be an invaluable ally. He'd seen Kevin loitering near my house several times in the weeks leading up to the theft. "Always looking shifty, that one," Arthur had grumbled. "Gave me a bad feeling. I just wish I'd said something sooner." His observations, while perhaps not direct evidence of the theft itself, painted a picture of premeditation. He was happy to provide a statement to the police and to Ellie. Meanwhile, Kevin was out on bail, much to my disgust. His parents had apparently scraped together the money, and he was back in the neighborhood, though thankfully under some sort of house arrest or curfew. The rumor mill, fueled by neighborhood gossip and snippets from other teenagers, suggested he was anything but repentant. If anything, he was reveling in his newfound notoriety, bragging about his epic joyride, his social media. which a tech-savvy friend of Ellie's managed to unearth despite its privacy settings. Turns out, teenagers aren't as clever about digital footprints as they think, was a goldmine. There were veiled posts alluding to the incident, comments from his friends praising his guts, and even a disgustingly smug selfie taken just hours before the theft, captioned, "Bout to do something legendary, YOLO." Ellie's friend archived everything. This kid was digging his own grave, and his mother was handing him the shovel. Karen, true to her word, or perhaps her threat, didn't stay quiet for long. A few days later, an official-looking envelope arrived from the Oakwood Estates HOA. It wasn't a bill for damages to my own car, thankfully, but it was almost as insulting. It was a violation notice for my lawn. Apparently, a patch of grass near the sidewalk was a quarter of an inch too high. The notice included a blurry photo, likely taken by Karen herself from her Range Rover, and a stern warning about daily fines if it wasn't rectified within 24 hours. The pettiness was breathtaking. My Lamborghini is stolen and destroyed by her son. She demands I pay for it, and now she's coming after me for lawn maintenance. This wasn't just about the car anymore, it was a campaign of harassment. I meticulously documented the notice, took photos of my perfectly acceptable lawn, and sent a polite registered letter back to the HOA, CCing Ellie, stating that the alleged violation was unfounded and appeared to be retaliatory. I also gently reminded them of the ongoing criminal investigation concerning the theft of my property by a resident of the HOA president's household. The game was afoot. Karen was clearly trying to use her HOA power to intimidate me, to make my life miserable until I caved to her absurd demands. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some random rich guy with a fancy car. I was a man who had spent his life solving complex problems, and Karen, with her petty tyranny and her delinquent son, was just another problem waiting to be solved. And I was very, very patient. The HOA violation notice for my lawn was just the opening salvo in Karen's campaign of petty harassment. Over the next few weeks, a steady trickle of similar notices found their way to my mailbox. One cited my mailbox itself, claiming the paint was faded beyond acceptable community standards. It was less than a year old and looked brand new. Another complained about a slight discoloration on one of the driveway paving stones, visible only if you were on your hands and knees with a magnifying glass. Each notice was meticulously documented, photographed, and responded to with polite, legally precise letters drafted with Ellie's input, always pointing out the retaliatory nature of the claims in light of the ongoing criminal proceedings against her son. It was clear Karen was using the HOA bylaws as her personal cudgel, trying to wear me down. Little did she know, I thrive on details and due process. My background in software architecture had trained me to be meticulous, to analyze systems for flaws, and the Oakwood Estates HOA under Karen's reign was looking like a very flawed system indeed. Ellie was particularly interested in this angle. If she's abusing her power this blatantly with you, Mark, she'd said during one of our strategy sessions, chances are she's doing it to others, or worse, mismanaging HOA funds. It's a common pattern with these petty tyrants. This opened up a new avenue for investigation. While my primary focus was still the theft of my Lamborghini and Kevin's prosecution, dismantling Karen's power base in the HOA was becoming an increasingly appealing secondary goal. If she was willing to harass me over a blade of grass, what else was she capable of? I started talking to my neighbors more, subtly gauging their experiences with Karen and the HOA. Arthur, of course, was already on my side, but others, initially hesitant, began to open up once they realized I wasn't just going to roll over. Stories emerged of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of rules, and a general atmosphere of intimidation. One neighbor, a quiet woman named Mrs. Plecht Davis, told me how Karen had forced her to repaint her front door 3 times because the shade of blue was not quite right, costing her hundreds of dollars and immense stress. Another recounted how his request to install a small, discreet solar panel array, something actively encouraged by the city for energy conservation, had been repeatedly denied by Karen without any valid reason, only to find out later that Karen's brother-in-law owned a local roofing company that didn't do solar installations and had bid unsuccessfully on his roof replacement a year prior. The picture emerging was one of an HOA president running the community like her personal fiefdom, using her position to settle scores, enrich her cronies, and generally make life miserable for anyone who didn't kiss her ring. This wasn't just about my car anymore, it was about community justice. Meanwhile, the investigation into Kevin was progressing. His initial bravado was reportedly fading as the seriousness of the charges, grand theft auto of a vehicle valued over 100, felony reckless endangerment and more, began to sink in. Ellie's tech contact had also managed to recover some deleted text messages from Kevin's phone, obtained through a warrant, of course, that were particularly damning. In them, he not only bragged about his plan to steal the Lamborghini, but also mentioned his mom wouldn't care and might even find it funny if that show-off Henderson got taken down a peg. This was huge. It suggested Karen might have had prior knowledge, or at the very least, had fostered an environment where her son felt empowered to commit such an act without fear of repercussion from her. Ellie's eyes lit up when I told her. This could move her from just being the mother of a delinquent to an accessory, or at least contributory negligence on a civil level. She mused. We need to tread carefully, but this is a significant development. We provided this information to the detective in charge of Kevin's case, who seemed increasingly weary of Karen's constant calls to his office, proclaiming her son's innocence and accusing the police department of harassing her good boy. Karen, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued her petty war. She escalated from lawn and mailbox violations to trying to get the HOA to fine me for unapproved landscaping modifications because I'd replaced a dead rosebush with a healthier one of the same species. She even tried to claim my new security cameras violated HOA aesthetic guidelines, despite several other homes having visible cameras. Each attempt was met with a firm, legally sound rebuttal from Ellie, often citing the HOA's own bylaws back at them, highlighting inconsistencies in enforcement and the clear retaliatory pattern. Karen's frustration was palpable. I'd see her driving past my house, slowing down, her face a mask of impotent fury. Her pristine Range Rover, usually gleaming, even started to look a little less immaculate, as if her obsession with my supposed infractions was causing her to neglect her own symbols of status. One afternoon she accosted me while I was getting my mail. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Mr. Henderson?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "With your fancy lawyer and your smug letters. But you won't win. We're the HOA. We make the rules." I simply smiled calmly. "Actually, Karen," I replied, "the members of the HOA make the rules, and I'm a member, and I suspect there are quite a few members who are getting tired of how those rules are being applied. Or misapplied, as the case may be." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," I said smoothly. "Just stating a fact. Transparency and accountability are wonderful things, don't you think?" I then turned and walked back to my house, leaving her sputtering by the mailboxes. The seeds of discontent were being sown, and Karen, in her arrogance, was doing more to water them than I ever could. Her attempts to isolate and punish me were backfiring, slowly galvanizing a quiet resistance among other residents who had suffered under her reign. The upcoming annual HOA meeting, usually a dull affair, was suddenly looking like it might be very interesting indeed. Ellie and I started to strategize how we could leverage this growing dissatisfaction, not just to defend against Karen's attacks, but to potentially oust her from power altogether. The scope of my revenge was expanding from personal restitution to systemic reform, and it felt good. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for a month after Karen's initial barrage of violation notices. This meeting, usually a sparsely attended formality where Karen would drone on about budget minutiae and a compliant, intimidated board would rubber stamp her decisions, was now shaping up to be a pivotal moment. Ellie and I saw it as the perfect opportunity, not just to address my personal grievances, but to expose Karen's broader pattern of abuse and potential mismanagement to the entire community. We began our preparations in earnest. Ellie, with her legal expertise, drafted a series of motions and resolutions we planned to introduce. These included a call for an independent audit of the HOA's finances for the past 3 years, sparked by Mrs. Placed Davis's story and whispers of unusually high administrative fees, a proposal to clarify and standardize the violation enforcement process to prevent selective targeting, and, most daringly, a motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen as HOA president. This last one was a gamble, but we felt the tide of discontent was strong enough to at least make it a serious discussion. My role was to gather support and evidence. I spent evenings talking to neighbors, sharing my experiences, and listening to theirs. I compiled a dossier. Copies of Karen's retaliatory violation notices against me, contrasted with photos of similar or worse infractions at the homes of her allies on the board that went unaddressed. I included written statements from Mrs. Davis, Arthur, and several others who were willing to speak out, detailing their own negative experiences. The social media posts from Kevin, especially the text suggesting Karen's foreknowledge or tacit approval of his actions, were also carefully included as supporting evidence of her character and judgment. We were building a compelling case not just of her unsuitability as president, but of a clear conflict of interest given her son's felony charges related to another HOA member. The police investigation into Kevin was also reaching a critical stage. The district attorney's office, armed with the evidence of premeditation, the theft itself, the reckless endangerment, and the sheer value of the destroyed Lamborghini, was preparing to formally indict him on multiple felony counts. They were not, as Karen had hoped, treating it as a youthful indiscretion. My insurance company, meanwhile, had officially declared the Huracan a total loss and had been surprisingly efficient in processing the claim, though the final settlement amount was still under negotiation. They had also formally initiated subrogation proceedings against Kevin and, by extension, Karen and Gary as his legal guardians, to recover their payout and my substantial deductible. The financial pressure on Karen's family was mounting entirely of their own making. Karen, however, seemed to believe she could still control the narrative. A week before the HOA meeting, she sent out a newsletter, a glossy, self-congratulatory piece detailing all the wonderful work the HOA board under her leadership had accomplished. It painted a picture of Oakwood Estates as a suburban paradise, thanks to her diligent efforts. Tucked away in the middle was a thinly veiled attack on certain disruptive elements who sought to undermine community harmony with frivolous complaints and an unwillingness to adhere to established standards. It was clearly aimed at me and anyone else who dared question her authority. This only strengthened our resolve. Her arrogance was, yet again, her own worst enemy. The evening of the HOA meeting arrived. The community clubhouse, usually half empty for these events, was packed. Word had spread. There was a buzz in the air, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. I saw many familiar faces, Arthur giving me a thumbs up, Mrs. Davis offering a small, hopeful smile. Karen, flanked by her usual sycophantic board members, a nervous-looking treasurer and a perpetually scowling secretary, sat at the head table, looking unusually flustered by the turnout. She tried to project confidence, her voice a little too loud, her smile a little too forced as she banged the gavel to call the meeting to order. Her attire was, as usual, an attempt at power dressing. A severe navy blue suit that looked more like a uniform, adorned with a chunky gold necklace that probably cost a month's mortgage payment for some of the attendees. She launched into her prepared speech, a rambling monologue about property values and the importance of maintaining our exclusive standards. It was the same old rhetoric, but tonight it fell flat. The audience was restless. When she finally opened the floor for new business, Ellie, who had registered as my proxy, stood up. Calmly, professionally, she began. "Madam President, members of the HOA," she started, her voice clear and carrying through the suddenly silent room. "I am Eleanor Vance, legal counsel for Mr. Mark Henderson. We have several items of new business to propose." Karen's face tightened. "Lawyers, Mr. Henderson, is this really necessary?" she asked, trying to sound dismissive but failing to hide the tremor in her voice. "Given recent events, Madam President, and the concerns of numerous residents, yes, it is," Ellie replied coolly. Ellie then systematically laid out our proposals: the independent financial audit, the review of enforcement procedures, and finally, the motion for a vote of no confidence. With each point, she presented a concise summary of the supporting evidence, the pattern of retaliatory fines, the documented inconsistencies, the sworn affidavits from other residents detailing their own harassment. When she mentioned the texts from Kevin suggesting Karen's indifference or even encouragement regarding the Lamborghini theft, a gasp went through the room. Karen turned pale. "Those are lies. Fabrications," she sputtered. "My son would never, I would never." "The evidence will speak for itself, Madam President," Ellie said calmly. "My name is Mark Henderson," I began, my voice steady. "Many of you know what happened to my car. What you may not know is that after Karen's son stole and destroyed it, Karen herself came to my home and demanded that I pay for the damages. She asked me to lie to the police to protect her son. When I refused, she began a campaign of harassment, using her HOA powers, fining me for non-existent violations. I then presented copies of my violation notices, alongside pictures of my immaculate lawn and mailbox, contrasting them with clear violations at the homes of board members that had been ignored for months, even years. The murmur in the room grew louder. People were nodding, exchanging glances. The carefully constructed facade of Karen's benevolent leadership was crumbling. Just as Karen was about to erupt, trying to shout me down, the clubhouse doors opened. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by Sergeant Miller. A hush fell over the room. Sergeant Miller walked to the front, looking directly at Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but polite. "Karen, last name, I have a warrant for your arrest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen stared, mouth agape, her face a cocktail of shock and disbelief. "Arrest me? For what?" she stammered. "Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and potentially accessory after the fact to grand theft auto based on new evidence," Sergeant Miller stated calmly. "We also have a warrant for Kevin last name for additional charges related to witness intimidation. He's being picked up as we speak." One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." Karen looked wildly around the room, her eyes landing on her husband Gary, who looked like he was about to faint. Her board cronies stared at their shoes. There was no support left. Her reign was over, not with a bang, but with the click of handcuffs. As they escorted a sputtering, protesting Karen out of the clubhouse, the room erupted, not in cheers, not immediately, but in a wave of shocked relief, then a buzz of excited conversation. The carefully planned takedown had been even more dramatic than I'd envisioned. Ellie gave me a subtle nod, a small smile playing on her lips. The smoking gun hadn't just been the texts. It was Karen's own unhinged actions and the courage of the community finally speaking up, all culminating in this very public, very satisfying downfall. The HOA meeting was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Now, with Karen gone, the real work of rebuilding could start. The sight of Karen being led away in handcuffs from her own HOA meeting was, I admit, a moment of profound, if somewhat grim, satisfaction. It wasn't just about the Lamborghini anymore, or the petty fines, or her absurd demands. It was about accountability finally catching up to someone who believed herself above it. The room was in an uproar. Gary, Karen's husband, looked utterly broken, muttering apologies to no one in particular before slinking out, presumably to find a bail bondsman. Karen's remaining board members, the treasurer and the scowling secretary, looked like deer caught in headlights. They had clearly hitched their wagons to a falling star and were now facing the consequences. With Karen gone, an impromptu leadership vacuum formed. Arthur, bless his heart, was the first to speak. "Well?" he said, his voice resonating with newfound confidence. "It seems we have a vacancy for president, and a lot of work to do." The tension in the room broke, replaced by a surge of energy. People started talking, really talking, for the first time in what felt like years. Ideas were exchanged, grievances aired openly without fear of retribution, and a sense of common purpose began to emerge. Ellie, ever the pragmatist, gently guided the proceedings. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the crowd, "while tonight's events have been dramatic, we still have important HOA business to conduct. Perhaps we should start by electing an interim president and scheduling a special election for a new board." This sensible suggestion was met with widespread approval. Mrs. Fronder.allb2.or. Davis, the quiet woman who had been forced to repaint her door multiple times, was nominated and, to her tearful surprise, overwhelmingly elected as interim president. It was a poetic turn of events. The very people Karen had tried to silence were now stepping up to lead. The motions Ellie and I had prepared were passed with near unanimous consent. An independent forensic audit of the HOA finances was commissioned on the spot. The violation enforcement process was suspended pending a full review by a newly formed committee, which I volunteered to advise, leveraging my analytical skills. The atmosphere in the clubhouse was transformed. It felt like a liberation. As for Karen and Kevin, their legal troubles were just beginning. Kevin was already facing serious felony charges for the car theft. The new charges of witness intimidation, stemming from threats he'd made to one of his friends who was cooperating with the police, only deepened his predicament. Karen's arrest for obstruction of justice and witness tampering was a direct result of her attempts to get me to lie and her subsequent harassment campaign, which the DA viewed as a clear effort to intimidate a key witness, me. The deleted texts from Kevin's phone, suggesting her prior knowledge or at least her condoning attitude, were being investigated for potential charges of accessory or conspiracy. Their good family image was shattered, their reputation in tatters. The legal fees alone were likely to be financially crippling. My insurance company, meanwhile, was proceeding with its subrogation claim against them with renewed vigor. They would be pursued for the full value of the Lamborghini, my deductible, and all associated costs. The Verde Mantis Huracan Evo was gone, a painful loss, but its sacrifice had, in a strange way, cleansed the neighborhood of a toxic influence. In the weeks that followed, Oakwood Estates began to heal. The forensic audit of the HOA finances, as Ellie had suspected, uncovered a hornet's nest of irregularities. Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, lavish dinners, consulting fees, paid to a shell company owned by her brother-in-law, even funding for her Range Rover's maintenance under vague administrative vehicle categories. This led to further criminal charges against her for embezzlement. The sheer scale of her grifting was astonishing. It turned out my Lamborghini saga had just scratched the surface of her malfeasance. The HOA, under Mrs. Propick Davis's interim leadership, and with active participation from newly emboldened residents, began a comprehensive overhaul of its bylaws and procedures. Transparency became the new watchword. Meetings were well attended, constructive, and focused on genuine community improvement, not on petty power plays. The atmosphere was lighter, friendlier. People were actually talking to each other again. The fear Karen had instilled was gone. As for me, I eventually got a new car. A Porsche 911 Turbo S this time, in a subtle but elegant chalk gray. Still a head-turner, but perhaps a little less conspicuous, as Karen might have put it. I also installed an even more formidable security system, though I doubted I'd have any more trouble from the likes of Kevin. He was eventually convicted on multiple felonies and sentenced to juvenile detention, followed by a long period of probation and community service. His dreams of legendary joyrides were over. Karen, facing a mountain of evidence and multiple criminal charges, eventually took a plea deal. She avoided a long prison sentence but received significant probation, was forced to pay substantial restitution to the HOA, and was, of course, permanently barred from ever holding any position of authority in any community association again. Her fall from self-appointed queen to convicted embezzler was complete and very public. Gary divorced her shortly thereafter, reportedly tired of the endless drama and financial ruin. The last I heard, Karen was working a low-wage retail job in another town, her expensive clothes and Range Rover long gone. A far cry from the HOA tyrant who demanded I pay for her son's destruction of my Lamborghini. Sometimes when I'm polishing the Porsche, I think back on the whole insane episode. The sheer audacity of Karen and Kevin still boggles my mind. But I also think about the outcome, not just the personal vindication, but the positive change it brought to an entire community. It's a reminder that sometimes, when pushed too far, even a quiet, retired software architect can find himself in a battle against suburban tyranny, and with a bit of logic, determination, and a good lawyer, can actually win. It cost me a Lamborghini, but it brought peace and fairness back to Oakwood Estates, and that, I suppose, is a trade-off I can live with.